and welcome back to Security Simplified. So, we talk a lot about finding vulnerabilities and sometimes about fixing vulnerabilities on this channel, right? But what about preventing vulnerabilities in an application? So, today I'd like to talk about the first steps you can take towards a more secure application. A lot of the times when we think of fixing vulnerabilities, we think of this sort of whack-a-mole kind of operation where if we find a vulnerability or if someone else reports a vulnerability, we'll fix it. But a lot of vulnerabilities can actually be systematically prevented by designing and planning your application in a secure way. The first step in securing an application is therefore identifying the different requirements of your application and making sure that you plan for these features in a secure way. So let's analyze the requirements of your program. So let's say that you're building a messenger app. What are your application's requirements? This is a messaging app. So you'll need a way for users to submit private messages and a way to store and transport these private messages. You'll also need a way to authenticate users and store users' personal information like email addresses and friends lists. You'll also need a way to determine which users are able to access which messages, as well as who is allowed to send messages to whom. So understanding what you need to build your application will really inform you what data you're protecting, as well as what kind of security considerations you'll have when you're building your application. And the cost of fixing vulnerabilities is way lower if you do it early, because if you can choose the right implementations and dependencies to use at this point, you can prevent a lot of vulnerabilities naturally. For instance, in this case, you'll probably need to pick a secure way to authenticate users. Are you going to use a simple email and password setup? Are you going to use OAuth? And are you going to implement MFA for extra security? You might also need to store user passwords, and that means selecting a secure hashing algorithm so that you don't store passwords in plain text, as well as deciding on a secure location to store this data. Are you going to implement that data store yourself? Or are you going to outsource it to products that specialize in confidential data storage? And what are the pros and cons of each of these options? Deep-rooted security flaws like insecure data storage or bad authentication mechanisms are very hard to fix once you start developing the application, because if you want to change it further down the line, you might need to change a lot of other parts of the code. So it's way easier to get security right with planning before you actually start coding.